The reading for this week is actually considered the psalm for the week, even though it comes from the Gospel of Luke. It is a psalm, it is a song, and the last couple of verses are worth singing. The tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. The tender mercy of our God. Mercy, as I'm defining it right now, is an unexpected kindness, an unexpected turn of events that lead into a greater truth about both life and who God is. Mercy is an unexpected kindness that gives voice to Augustine's plea to the Creator, "Tell me why you mean so much to me." A psalm is a song of praise or a lament or a plea that offers some wisdom about what God is like and what God may be capable of. Zechariah is the one who offers these words in the Gospel of Luke. He is a priest and the father of John the Baptist. And if you remember the story, Zechariah has had his mouth closed by an angel for questioning what God is about to do. This is a familiar story in the Bible, not just here in Luke, but elsewhere, where God provides fertility in infertile places and situations. God makes a way when those who are dressed up like they might have a clue about who God is or what God is about to do. The priests of the world, those permitted to enter the Holy of Holies, they can't quite wrap their minds around who God is and what God is about to do. And Zechariah is dumbstruck. He is silenced. Such is the tender mercy of God, the unexpected surprise. The story invites us into glimpsing God's tender mercy, an unexpected kindness, a reversal of what we may have assumed. Of course, Elizabeth will not have a child, and then she does. Of course, Mary will not have a child, and then she does. John the Baptist, you know his story. He will go on to win the hearts of many with the purity of his message, his unbending call to repentance, to make the path straight, to allow God to refine our inner thoughts and to seek a different kind of plane. Zechariah sings of God's tender mercy and of light dawning, of feet being guided into peace, into the paths of peace. If you know the story, do you remember what happens to John the Baptist? You know what happens to John the Baptist, right? He runs up against the wishes of, quite frankly, a thin-skinned megalomaniac named Herod, who, because he is a thin-skinned megalomaniac, values his own reputation more than he does justice. You remember that story? It's like the story of Jephthah in the book of Judges, the worst time, some would argue, in the history of the nation of Israel. Someone in authority makes a rash vow, a completely irresponsible vow, and then when he has to live up to it, he decides out of insecurity or fear or self-preservation that to heck with the victim, he's going to honor his own word in order to not lose face. John and John's family suffered a fate you would not wish on your worst enemy. Later, it would be Jesus' turn, a matter that we are perhaps even more familiar with. Sure, a number of people helped pave the way for the cross. But we should never underestimate Pilate's complicity in the death of Jesus, which is just as clear as Herod's, even though Pilate, of course, offers us his most famous expression, "I wash my hands of this." Things are rarely so simple. Just because you say it wasn't your fault doesn't mean it wasn't your fault. When some lives become cheap, when flesh is cheap, we know what happens. And yet here we find ourselves being invited into singing a song of God's mercy, of unexpected kindness, and a song about the paths of peace on a Sunday where we have already remembered those who have gone on before us. We've celebrated the common meal, welcomed new members, and in a few minutes we will listen to Cynthia talk about other important work that is happening in Montclair. We know that the Gospels and the Gospel stories, they lead in one direction, toward tension. Toward teaching, but also to tension. And toward Jesus embodying mercy for scores of hurting people who are living intention, toward people getting sick and people getting tired of that mercy that Jesus keeps extending, towards those holding some of the levers of power being unwilling to accommodate a bigger circle, towards a cross, towards pain. Yes, ultimately also towards the rolling back of a stone. But the rolling back of the stone may not feel all that comfortable who are experiencing difficulty. It may not be all that comfortable knowing that doing the right thing didn't make John's life comfortable. And it didn't make Jesus' life comfortable. And it doesn't always make our lives comfortable. And yet we are being invited by the gospel to sing of God's tender mercy this morning, of God's unexpected kindness to us. We honor those who have gone on ahead of us and tend not to think that in their best moments they were always comfortable, always living a life of leisure. Indeed, we honor people like Helen Nelson by noting how she lived with joy and determination after her husband passed away. We are not ultimately marked by those times of rest and leisure and relaxation. Life tends to find meaning in moments of struggle. We can sit in our TV rooms if we have one, if we have that kind of luxury, and we can be safe but be unfulfilled, be empty in our safety. We are being invited into a recognition of God's unexpected kindness today. Our call, the ministers of this church, is to minister to all people, no matter who they are or how they identify themselves. Getting the tone precisely right in worship services, especially services like today's, is a near impossible task. Last week, Phillips Theological Seminary in Oklahoma City wrote to all their alums and said that there is nothing that we ever taught you while you are here in school that would adequately prepare you to preach on November 13th. And at the same time, as we try to allow for a generous welcome of all people, we must be very careful not to sweep away the disturbing shadows of people's souls that have emerged or emerging. The swastikas at Adam Yauch Park in Brooklyn Heights. The call to, over here on Bellevue Avenue, suck it up, Buttercup. The sticker on Masjid Al-Wadud on Bloomfield Avenue. The hijab pulling. Stacy was talking to her best friend just the other day. Her best friend lives in Portland, Oregon, and someone yelled at her the most horrible D word someone could yell at a person. And yet we are being invited into God's tender mercy, God's unexpected kindness to us. I presume then that we as humans who struggle for meaning and struggle for meaning in our communities today and struggle for how to talk to each other about really big, important matters and struggle to summon the courage to do the next right thing, I presume then that we go on because of God's tender mercy that helps us to not give in to despair, that sets the ground rules for our community, that gives shape to our story as a people and shape to your story as a person. Hope is not some flimsy thing. It's not the same as optimism. People can take optimism away very easily. Optimism is, I feel like everything's going to work out. Well, who says you're going to feel that way tomorrow? Maybe you will, maybe you won't. Hope, on the other hand, is theological, rooted in God's mercy, God's unexpected kindness that lays out the roadmap for the journey. That this work of being in the world and of embodying virtue, of extending mercy yourself, it's not safe. It is not safe. And it will not always lead to personal happiness. 4 days ago, I saw some of the worst news that I've ever seen in my life. I went to seminary with a man named Dennis Langdon, who is a United Methodist minister in Chicago. There was a group of us who, when we went to seminary, we were in our early to mid-20s. And because we were people in our early to mid-20s, we had a tendency to go out on Friday night until the kind of time of day where a lot of people are starting to get up. And Dennis had a family already, and he was married already. And very occasionally he would come out, and he would often have to leave and go home early because he wasn't going to stay out as late as the rest of us. He was like an older brother, often patiently injecting words of wisdom and life advice to those of us much younger. Dennis had a family, and his oldest son, a boy named Grayson, would play basketball with a number of the seminary students. Grayson was about 10, 11, 12 years old when I was at Garrett in seminary. Dennis could have served anywhere around the country, such is his talent and wisdom, but he chose to serve on the south side of Chicago because that's where he's from and he wanted to go home. Dennis went back to his neighborhood, and he was one of the initiators of the Thou Shalt Not Murder campaign. That was a campaign that asked people on the south side of Chicago to go just 24 hours without any bloodshed. The day that they picked was Easter Sunday, and they were successful. There were no murders on the south side of Chicago last Easter Sunday. Dennis's son, Grayson, was murdered this week. Murdered at the hands of gun violence. Dennis chose a path of virtue and of extending mercy, and like John the Baptist and like Jesus, tragedy appeared. This is what hope looks like to me. Not optimism, but hope. Dennis is going to go back to his neighborhood once again and pick up the Thou Shalt Not Murder campaign next year. And he is going to walk into that hurricane with his community alongside of him. This is what hope looks like to me today. Hope looks like children in our town, little children who went over here and painted over anger with a rainbow. Hope looks like the folks in Adam Yauch Park who painted over the swastikas and held a rally there this morning. Hope looks like Stacy's best friend calling her and saying, "This is what somebody called me," and Stacy walking that walk with her, or trying the best that she could and listening no matter what. Hope looks like a return to the neighborhood, a return to our neighborhood to practice the politics of virtue and decency and civility, and being willing to, if it's possible at all, engage your uncle at Thanksgiving this week, extending unexpected kindness if it is possible and if it can be offered. Hope looks like those times where we live in homes and every member of that household feels like they are doing something all of the time that really makes a difference, where we talk about faith, where we talk about what really matters at the table. Hope looks like breaking bread in community one more time, even when we've done it 1,000 times. Breaking bread one more time without knowing what's to come, only that you and I, we will walk with God and God walks with us. And hopefully for today, that will be enough for us. May God's peace be with you.